Anne Frank, top of page 316. Friday, June 16th, 1944. Dearest Kitty, new problems. Miss Van D is at her wit's end. She's talking about getting shot, being thrown in prison, being hanged, and suicide. She's jealous that Peter confides in me and not in her. Offended that Dussel doesn't respond sufficiently to her flirtations, and afraid her husband's going to squander all of her coat money on tobacco. She quarrels, curses, cries, feels sorry for herself, laughs, and starts all over again. What on earth can you do with such a silly, sniveling specimen of humanity? Nobody takes her seriously. She has no strength of character. She complains to one and all, and you should see how she walks around von Hissenow von War Museum. Even worse, Peter's becoming insolent. Mr. Van Daan irritable, and Mother cynical. Yes, everyone's in quite a state. There's only one rule you need to remember. Laugh at everything and forget everybody else. It sounds egotistical, but it's actually the only cure for those suffering from self-pity. Mr. Cougar's supposed to spend 4 weeks in Alkmaar on a work detail. He's trying to get out of it with a doctor's certificate and a letter from Opetka. Mr. Kleinman's hoping his stomach will be operated on soon. Starting at 11 last night, all private phones were cut off. Yours, Anne Frank. Friday, June 23rd, 1944. Dearest Kitty, nothing special going on here. The British have begun their all-out attack on Cherbourg. According to Pym and Mr. Van Daan, we're sure to be liberated before October 10th. The Russians are taking part in the campaign. Yesterday they started their offensive near Witzbach, exactly 3 years to the day that the Germans invaded Russia, but spirits have sunk lower than ever. We're nearly out of potatoes. From now on, we're going to count them out for each person. Then everyone can do what they want with them. Starting Monday means taking a week of vacation. Mr. Kleinman's doctors haven't found anything on the x-rays. He's torn between having an operation and letting matters take their course. Yours, Anne Frank. Tuesday, June 27th, 1944. My dearest Kitty, the mood has changed. Everything's going enormously well. Cherbourg, Visco, someone fell today. They're sure to have captured lots of men and equipment. 5 German generals were killed near Cherbourg and 2 taken captive. Now that they've got a harbor, the British can bring whatever they want on shore. The whole Cotentin Peninsula has been captured just 3 weeks after the invasion. What a feat. And the 3 weeks since D-Day, there hasn't been a day without rain and storms, neither here nor in France. But this bad luck hasn't kept the British and the Americans from displaying their might. And how, of course, the Germans have launched their wonder weapon. But a little firecracker like that would hardly make a dent, except maybe minor damage in England and screaming headlines in the Kraut newspapers. Anyway, when they realize in Krautland that the Bolsheviks really are getting closer, they'll be shaking in their boots. All German women who aren't working for the military are being evacuated, together with their children, from the coastal regions to the province of Groningen, Frechen, and Gelderland. Mustert has announced that if the invasion reaches Holland, he'll enlist. Is that fat pig planning to fight? He could have done that in Russia long before now. Finland turned down a peace offer some time ago, and now the negotiations have been broken off again. Those numbskulls, they'll be sorry. How far do you think we'll be on July 27th? Yours, Anne Frank. Friday, June 30th, 1944. Dearest Kitty, bad weather from one at a stretch to the 30 June. Don't I say that well? Oh, yes, I already know a little English. Just to prove it, I'm reading An Ideal Husband with the help of a dictionary. War's going wonderfully. Mogilev and Oshla have fallen. Lots of prisoners. Everything's all right here. Spirits are improving. Are super optimistic and triumphant. The Van Daans are doing disappearing acts with sugar. Bubs changed her hair, and Meep has a week off. That's the latest news. I've been having really ghastly root canal work done on one of my front teeth. It's been terribly painful. It was so bad Dussel thought I was going to faint, and I nearly did. Miss Van D promptly got a toothache as well. Yours, Anne Frank. P.S. We've heard from Basil the Bernard, played the part of the innkeeper in Mina von Buffen. He has artistic leanings, said Mother. Thursday, July 6, 1944. Dearest Kitty, my blood runs cold when Peter talks about becoming a criminal or a speculator. Of course, he's joking, but I still have the feeling he's afraid of his own weakness. Margot and Peter are always saying to me, if I had your spunk and your strength, if I had your drive and unflagging energy, I could. Is it really such an admirable trait not to let myself be influenced by others? Am I right in following my own conscience? To be honest, I can't imagine how anyone could say I'm weak, and then stay that way. If you know that about yourself, why not fight it? Why not develop your character? Their answer has always been because it's much easier not to. This reply leaves me feeling rather discouraged. Easy? Does that mean a life of deceit and laziness is easy too? Oh no, that can't be true. It can't be true that people are so readily tempted by ease and money. I've given a lot of thought to what my answer should be, to how I should get Peter to believe in himself, and most of all, to change himself for the better. I don't know whether I'm on the right track. I've often imagined how nice it would be if someone were to confide everything to me, but now that it's reached that point, I realize how difficult it is to put yourself in someone else's shoes and find the right answer, especially since easy and money are new and completely alien concepts to me. Peter beginning to lean on me, and I don't want that. Not under any circumstances. It's hard enough standing on your own 2 feet, but when you also have to remain true to your character and soul, it's harder still. I've been drifting around at sea, have spent days searching for an effective antidote to the terrible word easy. How can I make it clear to him that, while it may seem easy and wonderful, it will drag him down to the depths, to a place where he'll no longer find friends, support, or beauty, so far down that he may never rise to the surface again? We're all alive, but we don't know why or what for. We're all searching for happiness. We're all leading lives that are different and yet the same. We 3 have been raised in good families. We have the opportunity to get an education and make something of ourselves. We have many reasons to hope for great happiness, but we have to earn it. And that's something you can't achieve by taking the easy way out. Earning happiness means doing good and working, not speculating and being lazy. Laziness may look inviting, but only work gives you true satisfaction. I can't understand people who don't like to work, but that isn't Peter's problem either. He just doesn't have a goal. Plus, he thinks he's too stupid and inferior to ever achieve anything. Poor boy. He's never known how it feels to make someone else happy, and I'm afraid I can't teach him. He isn't religious, scoffs at Jesus Christ, and takes the Lord's name in vain. And though I'm not an Orthodox either, it hurts me every time to see him so lonely, so scornful, so wretched. People who are religious should be glad, since not everyone is blessed with the ability to believe in a higher order. You don't have to live in fear of eternal punishment. The concepts of purgatory, heaven, and hell are difficult for many people to accept. Your religion itself, any religion, keeps a person on the right path. Not the fear of God, but upholding your own sense of honor and obeying your own conscience. How noble and good everyone could be if, at the end of each day, they were to review their own behavior and weigh up the rights and wrongs. They would automatically try to do better at the start of each new day, and after a while would certainly accomplish a great deal. Everyone is welcome to the prescription. It costs nothing and is definitely useful. Those who don't know will have to find out by experience that a quiet conscience gives you strength. Yours, Anne Frank. Saturday, July 28th, 1944. Dearest Kitty, Mr. Brox was in Beverlyck and managed to get a hold of strawberries at the produce auction. They arrived here dusty and full of sand, but in large quantities, no less than 24 crates for the office and us. That very same evening, we canned the first 6 jars and made 8 jars of jam. The next morning, Meep started making jam for the office. At 12:30, the outside door was locked. Crates were lugged into the kitchen with Peter, Father, and Mr. Van Daan stumbling up the stairs, and got hot water from the water heater. Margaret went for a bucket. All hands on deck. With a funny feeling in my stomach, I entered the overcrowded office kitchen. Meep, Bep, Mr. Kleiman, Jan, Father, Peter, the annex contingent with the supply corps, all mixed up together. And that, in the middle of the day, curtains and windows open, loud voices, banging doors. I was trembling with excitement. I kept thinking, are we really in hiding? This must be how it feels when you can finally go out into the world again. The pan was full, so I dashed upstairs where the rest of the family was holding strawberries around the kitchen table. At least that's what they were supposed to be doing, but more was going into their mouths than into the buckets. They were bound to need another bucket soon. Peter went back downstairs Then the doorbell rang twice, leaving the bucket where it was. Peter raced upstairs and shut the bookcase behind him. We sat, kicking our heels impatiently. The strawberries were waiting to be rinsed, but we stuck to the house rules. No running water when strangers are downstairs. They might hear the drains. Jan came up at once to tell us it had been the mailman. Peter hurried downstairs again. Ding-dong! The doorbell about to face. I listened to hear if anyone was coming, standing first at the bookcase, then at the top of the stairs. Finally, Peter and I leaned over the banister, straining our ears like a couple of burglars to hear the sounds from downstairs. No unfamiliar voices. Peter tiptoed halfway down the stairs and called out, Bep! Once more, Bep! His voice was drowned out by the bracken in the kitchen, so he ran down to the kitchen while I nervously kept watch from above. "Go upstairs at once, Peter. The accountant's here. You've got to leave." It was Mr. Cougar's voice. Sighing, Peter came upstairs and closed the bookcase. Mr. Cougar finally came up at 1:30. My gosh, the whole world's turned to strawberries. I had strawberries for breakfast, Jan's having them for lunch, Clyman's eating them as a snack, Meep's boiling them, Beb's hulling them, and I can smell them everywhere I go. I come upstairs to get away from all that red, and what do I see? People washing strawberries. The rest of the strawberries were canned. That evening, 2 jars were unsealed. Father quickly turned them into jam. The next morning, 2 more lids popped up, and that afternoon 4 lids. Mr. Van Daan hadn't gotten the jars hot enough when he was sterilizing them, so Father ended up making jam every evening. We ate hot cereal with strawberries, buttermilk with strawberries, bread with strawberries, strawberries for dessert, strawberries with sugar, strawberries with sand. For 2 days, there was nothing but strawberries, 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 and then our supply was either exhausted or in jars, safely under lock and key. "Hey, Anne," Margot called out one day. "Miss Van Hooven has let us have some peas, 20 pounds. "That's nice of her," I replied, and it certainly was. "But it's so much work. Ugh." "On Saturday, you've all got to shell peas," Mother announced at the table. And sure enough, this morning after breakfast, our biggest enamel pan appeared on the table, filled to the brim with peas. If you think shelling peas is boring work, you have to try removing the inner linings. I don't think many people realize that once you've pulled out the linings, the pods are soft, delicious, and rich in vitamin, but an even greater advantage is that you get nearly 3 times as much as when you eat just the peas. Stripping pods is a precise and meticulous job that might be suited to pedantic dentists or finicky spice experts, but it's a horror for an impatient teenager like me. We started work at 9:30. I sat down at 10:30. Got up again at 11. Sat down again at 11:30. My ears were humming with the following refrain: "Snap the ends, strip the pods, pull the string, pod in the pan. Snap the ends, strip the pods, pull the string, pod in the pan," etc., etc. My eyes were swimming. Green, green, worm, string, rotten pod, green, green. To fight the boredom and with something to do, I chattered all morning, saying whatever came into my head and making everyone laugh. The monotony was killing me. Every string I pulled made me more certain that I never, ever want to be just a housewife. At 12, we finally ate breakfast, but from 12:30 to 1:15, we had to strip pods again. When I stopped, I felt a bit seasick, and so did the others. I napped until 4, still in a daze because of those wretched peas. Yours, Anne M. Frank. Saturday, July 15th, 1944. Dearest Kitty, we received a book from the library with the challenging title, "What Do You Think of the Modern Young Girl?" I'd like to discuss the subjects today. The writer criticizes today's youth from head to toe, though without dismissing them all as hopeless cases. On the contrary, she believes that they have it within their power to build a bigger, better, and more beautiful world, but that they occupy themselves with superficial things without giving a thought to true beauty. Some passages I had the wrong feeling that the writer was directing her disapproval at me, which is why I finally want to bare my soul to you and defend myself against this attack. I have one outstanding character trait that must be obvious to anyone who's known me for any length of time. I have a great deal of self-knowledge. In everything I do, I can watch myself as if I were a stranger. I can stand across from the everyday Anne and, without being biased or making excuses, watch what she's doing. Both the good and the bad, the self-awareness never leaves me, and every time I open my mouth, I think, "You should have said that differently," or "That's fine the way it is." I condemn myself in so many ways that I'm beginning to realize the truth of Father's adage, "Every child has to raise itself." Parents can only advise the children or point them in the right direction. Ultimately, people shape their own character. In addition, I face life with the extraordinary amount of courage. I feel so strong and capable of bearing burdens, so young and free. When I first realized this, I was glad, because it means I can more easily withstand the blows life has in store. But I've talked about these things so often. Now I'd like to turn to the chapter, "Father and Mother Won't Understand Me." My parents have spoiled me rotten, treated me kindly, defended me against the Van Daans, and done all that parents can. And yet for the longest time I felt extremely lonely, left out, neglected, and misunderstood. Father did everything he could to curb my rebellious spirit, but it was no use. I've cured myself by holding my behavior up to the light and looking at what I was doing wrong. Why didn't Father support me in my struggle? Why did he fall short when he tried to offer me a helping hand? The answer is, he used the wrong methods. He always talked to me as if I were a child going through a difficult phase. It sounds crazy, since Father is the only one who's given me a sense of confidence and made me feel as if I'm a sensible person. But he overlooked one thing. He failed to see that the struggle to triumph over the difficulties was more important to me than anything else. I didn't want to hear about typical adolescent problems or other girls or you'll grow out of it. I didn't want to be treated the same as all the other girls, but as Anne in her own right, and Pym didn't understand that. Besides, I can't confide in anyone unless they tell me a lot about themselves, and because I know very little about him, I can't get on more intimate footings. Pym always acts like the elderly father who once had the same fleeting impulses, but who can no longer relate to me as a friend, no matter how hard he tries. As a result, I've never shared my outlook on life or my long, pondering thoughts with anyone but my diary and, once in a while, Margot. I've hid anything having to do with me from Father, never shared my ideas with him, deliberately alienated myself from him. I couldn't have done it any other way. I've let myself be guided entirely by my feelings. It was egotistical, but I've done what was best for my own peace of mind. I would lose that, plus the self-confidence I've worked so hard to achieve, if I were to be subjected to criticism halfway through the job. It may sound hard-hearted, but I can't take criticism from him either, because not only do I never share my innermost thoughts with him, but I've pushed him even further away by being irritable. This is a point I think about quite often. Why is it that Pym annoys me so much sometimes? I can hardly bear to have him tutor me, and his affection seems forced. I want to be left alone, and I'd rather he ignored me for a while until I'm more sure of myself than when I'm talking to him. I'm still torn with guilt about the mean letter I wrote him when I was so upset. Oh, it's so hard to be strong and brave in every way. Still, this hasn't been my greatest disappointment, no. I think about Peter much more than I do Father. I know very well that he was my conquest, and not the other way around. I created an image of him in my mind, pictured him as a quiet, sweet, sensitive boy, badly in need of friendship and love. I needed to pour out my heart to a living person. I wanted a friend who would help me find my way again. I accomplished what I set to do with Drew, and drew him slowly but surely toward me. When I finally got him to be my friend, it automatically developed into an intimacy that, when I think about it now, seems outrageous. We talked about the most private things, but we haven't yet touched upon the things closest to my heart. I still can't take my head or tail of Peter. Is it superficial, or is it shyness that holds him back, even with me? But putting all that aside, I made one mistake. I used intimacy to get closer to him, and in doing so, I ruled out the other forms of friendship. He longs to be loved, and I can see he's beginning to like me more with each passing day. Our time together leaves him feeling satisfied, but just makes me want to start all over again. I never broached the subject I long to bring out into the open. I forced Peter more than he realizes to get close to me, and now he's holding on for dear life. I honestly don't see any effective way of shaking him off and getting him back on his own 2 feet. I soon realized he could never be a kindred spirit, but still tried to help him break out of his narrow world and expand his youthful horizons. Deep down, the young are lonelier than the old. I read this in a book somewhere, and it stuck in my mind. As far as I can tell, it's true. So, if you're wondering whether it's harder for the adults here than for the children, the answer is no. It's certainly not. Older people have an opinion about everything and are sure of themselves and their actions. It's twice as hard for us young people to hold on to our opinions at a time when ideals are being shattered and destroyed, when the worst side of human nature predominates, when everyone has come to doubt truth, justice, and God. Anyone who claims that the older folks have a more difficult time in the annex doesn't realize that their problems have a far greater impact on us. We're much too young to deal with these problems, but they keep thrusting themselves on us until finally we're forced to think up a solution, though most of the time our solutions crumble when faced with the facts. It's difficult in times like these. Ideals, dreams, and cherished hopes rise within us, only to be crushed by grim reality. It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical, yet I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart. It's utterly impossible for me to build my life on a foundation of chaos, suffering, and death. I see the world being slowly transformed into a wilderness. I hear the approaching thunder that one day will destroy us too. I feel the suffering of millions, and yet, when I look up at the sky, I somehow feel that everything will change for the better, that this cruelty too will end, that peace and tranquility will return once more. In the meantime, I must hold on to my ideas. Perhaps the day will come when I'll be able to realize them. Yours, Anne M. Frank. July 21st, 1944. Dearest Kitty, I'm finally getting optimistic. Now at last things are going well. They really are. Great news. An assassination attempt has been made on Hitler's life, and for once not by Jewish communists or English capitalists, but by a German general who's not only a count, but young as well. The Fuhrer owes his life to divine providence. He escaped, unfortunately, with only a few minor burns and scratches. A number of the officers and generals who were nearby were killed or wounded. The head of the conspiracy has been shot. This is the best proof we've had so far that many officers and generals are fed up with the war and would like to see Hitler sink into a bottomless pit so they can establish a military dictatorship, make peace with the Allies, rearm themselves, and after a few decades start a new war. Perhaps Providence is deliberately bidding its time getting rid of Hitler, since he's much easier and cheaper for the Allies to let the impeccable Germans kill each other off. It's less work for the Russians and the British, and it allows them to start rebuilding their own cities all that much sooner. But we haven't reached that point yet, and I'd hate to anticipate the glorious event. Still, you've probably noticed that I'm telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. For once, I'm not rattling on about high ideals. Furthermore, Hitler has been so kind as to announce to his loyal, devoted people that as of today, all military personnel are under orders of the Gestapo, and that any soldier who knows that one of his superiors was involved in this cowardly attempt on the Führer's life may shoot him on sight. A fine kettle of fish that will be. Little Johnny's feet are sore after a long march, and his commanding officer bawls him out. Johnny grabs his rifle, shouts, You tried to kill the Führer! Take that! One shot, and the snooty officers who dared to reprimand him passes into eternal life, or his eternal death. Eventually, every time an officer sees a soldier or gives an order, he'll be practically wetting his pants because the soldiers have more say so than he does. Were you able to follow that, or have I been skipping from one subject to another again? I can't help it. The prospect of going back to school in October is making me too happy to be logical. Oh dear, didn't I just get through telling you I didn't want to anticipate events? Forgive me, Kitty. They don't call me a bundle of contradictions for nothing. Tuesday, August 1st, 1944. Dearest Kitty, a bundle of contradictions was the end of my previous letter, and is the beginning of this one. Can you please tell me exactly what a bundle of contradictions is? Well, what does contradiction mean? Like so many words, it can be interrupted in two ways. A contradiction imposed from without and one imposed from within. The former means not accepting other people's opinions, always knowing best, having the last word, in short, all those unpleasant traits for which I'm known. The latter, for which I'm not known, is my own secret. As I've told you many times, I'm split in two. One side contains my exuberant cheerfulness, my flippancy, my joy in life, and above all, my ability to appreciate the lighter side of things. By that, I mean not finding anything wrong with flirtatious, a kiss, an embrace, an off-color joke. This side of me is usually lying in wait to ambush the other one, which is much purer, deeper, and finer. No one knows Anne's better side, and that's why most people can't stand me. Oh, I can't be an amusing clown for an afternoon, but after that, everyone's had enough of me to last a month. Actually, I'm what a romantic movie is to a profound thinker, a mere diversion, a comic interlude, something that is soon forgotten, not bad, but not particularly good either. I hate having to tell you this, but why shouldn't I admit it when I know it's true? My lighter, more superficial side will always steal a march on the deeper side, and therefore always win. You can imagine how often I've tried to push away this Anne, which is only half of what is known as Anne, to beat her down, hide her, but it doesn't work, and I know why. I'm afraid that people who know me, as I usually am, will discover I have another side, a better and finer side. I'm afraid they'll mock me, think I'm ridiculous and sentimental, and not take me seriously. I'm used to not being taken seriously, but only the light-hearted Anne is used to it, and can put up with it. The deeper Anne is too weak. If I force the good Anne into the spotlight for even 15 minutes, she shuts up like a clam the moment she's called upon to speak and lets Anne, number one, do the talking. Before I realize it, she's disappeared. So the nice Anne is never seen in company. She's never made a single appearance, though she almost always takes the stage when I'm alone. I know exactly how I'd like to be, how I am on the inside, but unfortunately, I'm only like that with myself, and perhaps that's why, no, I'm sure that's the reason why I think of myself as happy on the inside, and other people think I'm happy on the outside. I'm guided by the pure Anne within, but on the outside, I'm nothing but a frolicsome little goat, tugging at its tether. As I've told you, what I say is not what I feel, which is why I have a reputation for being boy-crazy as well as a flirt, a smart aleck, and a reader of romances. The happy-go-lucky Anne laughs, gives a flippant reply, shrugs her shoulders, and pretends she doesn't give a darn. The quiet Anne reacts in just the opposite way. If I'm being completely honest, I'll have to admit that it does matter to me, that I'm trying very hard to change myself, but that I'm always up against a more powerful enemy. A voice within me is sobbing. You see, that's what's become of you. You're surrounded by negative opinions, dismayed looks, and mocking faces. People dislike you, and all because you don't listen to the advice of your own better half. Believe me, I'd like to listen, but it doesn't work. Because if I'm quiet and serious, everyone thinks I'm putting on a new act, and I have to save myself with a joke. And then I'm not even talking about my own family, who assume I must be sick, stuff me with aspirins and sedatives, feel my neck and forehead to see if I have a temperature, ask about my bowel movements, and berate me for being in a bad mood, until I just can't keep it up anymore, because when everybody starts hovering over me, I get crossed and sad and finally end up turning my heart inside out, the bad part on the outside and the good part on the inside, and keep trying to find a way to become what I'd like to be and what I could be if only there were no other people in the world. Yours, Anne and Frank. Anne's diary ends here. On the morning of August 4th, 1944, sometime between 10 and 10:30, a car pulled up at 263 President Grot. Several figures emerged, an SS Sergeant, Karl Josephson, in a full uniform, and at least 3 Dutch members of the security police, armed but in civilian clothes. Someone must have tipped them off. They arrested the 8 people hiding in the annex, as well as 2 of their helpers, Victor Kluger and Johannes Kleiman, though not Miep Geiss and Elizabeth Bap Voskel, and took all the valuables and cash they could find in the annex. After the arrest, Kluger and Kleiman were taken to a prison in Amsterdam. On September 11th, 1944, they were transferred without benefit of a trial to a camp in Amsterfoot. Kleiman, because of his poor health, was released on September 18, 1944. He remained in Amsterdam until his death in 1959. Klugers managed to escape his imprisonment on March 28, 1945, when he and his fellow prisoners were being sent to Germany as forced laborers. He immigrated to Canada in 1955 and died in Toronto in 1989. Elizabeth Beth Voskel Weeks died in Amsterdam in 1983. Miep Sandras Geiss died in 2010 at the age of 100. Her husband, Jan, died in 1993. Upon their arrest, the 8 residents of the annex were first brought to a prison in Amsterdam and then transferred to Westerbork, the transit camp for Jews in the north of Holland. They were deported on September 3, 1944, and the last transport to leave Westerbork, and arrived 3 days later in Auschwitz, Poland. Herman van Pels van Dan was, according to the testimony of Otto Frank, gassed to death in Auschwitz in October or November 1944, shortly before the gas chambers were dismantled. Augustie van Pels, Ventrola van Dan, was transported from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, from there to Braunschweig, then to Theresienstadt on April 9, 1945, and apparently to another concentration camp after that. It is certain that she did not survive, though the date of her death is unknown. Peter van Pels van Dan was forced to take part in the January 16, 1945 death march from Auschwitz to Meissen, Austria, where he died on May 5, 1945, 3 days before the camp was liberated. Fritz Pfeffer, Albert Dessel, died on December 20, 1944, in the Neugemm concentration camp, where he had been transferred from either Buchwald or Sachsenhausen. Edith Frank died in Auschwitz-Birkenau on January 6, 1945, from hunger and exhaustion. Margot and Anne Frank were transported from Auschwitz at the end of October and brought to Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp near Hanover, Germany. The typhus epidemic that broke out in the winter of 1944-1945 as a result of the horrendous hygienic conditions killed thousands of prisoners, including Margot, and a few days later, Anne. She must have died in late February or early March. The bodies of both girls were probably dumped in Bergen-Belsen mass graves. The camp was liberated by British troops on April 12, 1945. Otto Frank was the only one of the 8 to survive the concentration camps. After Auschwitz was liberated by Russian troops, he was repatriated to Amsterdam by way of Odessa and Marseille. He arrived in Amsterdam on June 3, 1945, and stayed there until 1953, when he moved to Basel, Switzerland, where his sister and her family, and later his brother, lived. He married Elfriede Marschert Gerfeld, originally from Vienna, who had survived Auschwitz and lost a husband and son in Mauthausen. Until his death on August 19, 1980, Otto Frank continued to live in Bursfeld outside Basel, where he devoted himself to sharing the message of his daughter's diary with people all over the world.